I got to, it's interesting, he was still on active duty. I have to mention, just when we talked about Meade and his invention, General Burnside actually was an inventor too, and he invented, I believe this is before the war, Burnside, and not only did he invent a really cool set of facial hair, but Burnside invented a repeating carbine that was actually used by the Union Army early in the war. Or it's some. I mean, obviously, we talked about they didn't have a lot of repeating weapons, but so yeah, a couple of inventors on the Union side. Let's move on to, this is the last Confederate we're going to talk about, Rafael Simms, the commerce raider, the man who caused fits for captains of Union merchant vessels. Simms was briefly held as a prisoner by the U.S. after the war, but he was released on parole. He was later arrested for treason on December 15th, 1865. But after a good deal of behind-the-scenes political machinations, all charges were eventually dropped, and he was finally released on April 7th of 1866. After Simms' release, here, Scott, here we go. He's going to become an academic.
There we are.
He worked as a professor of philosophy and literature at Louisiana State University. I'm sorry, it was originally called Louisiana State Seminary, now Louisiana State University. And Sherman had worked there before the war. We talked about that. He had been a commander of the military college. Simms also was a county judge and then as a newspaper editor. So like a lot of these guys, they just bounced around, didn't they, from place to place? Not everybody, but some of them. And like many top Confederate leaders, he wrote a memoir in which he advanced the myth of the lost cause. And he died of food poisoning in 1877 at the age of 67. Food poisoning, what a way to go. I had that once. I hate it. But,
yeah.
I got to mention in passing, I don't have this name on the list because this is a name that we did not even mention at all during the entire series. But I want to just throw a fun fact out there, trivia. There was only one Confederate who was executed by the U.S. government for treason. You know who that is?
I don't. Who's that?
It was Henry Wirz, who was, you probably never heard of him. You have to be pretty much a Civil War buff to have heard of this guy. He was the commandant of the notorious Confederate prison camp at Andersonville in Georgia. We didn't talk about prison camps at all, but I can sum it up by saying they were horrible no matter what side you were on. But the worst of all was Anderson, where people just died of starvation and disease. And there was a lot of Union anger, obviously, about when they liberated the prison. It was liberated during Sherman's march to the sea. And when that was liberated, these men came out of there, these prisoners who had been Union soldiers. Some of them looked like skeletons. If you look at pictures of them, you can Google that. You can Google Andersonville prisoner, and they look like people in the Nazi concentration camps after World War II.
Yeah, it's horrific. Their eyes are sunken into their sockets. Yeah.
Right. And so there was a tremendous amount of Union anger about this. And some would say he was more of a scapegoat than anything else. I mean, you could certainly argue that Robert E. Lee was responsible for way more Union deaths than Henry Wirz, but, Lee was protected by powerful friends in some ways. And you had the whole philosophy of live and let live that Lincoln promoted. So Wirz kind of, I guess, carried away the sins of all the Confederates. I don't know. It's interesting to think about.
All right. Well, this is my last Union figure, and then James will pick up the very last person who's also Union. So Joshua Chamberlain, he received the Medal of Honor for his bravery at Gettysburg. He served 4 terms as governor of Maine and became president of Bowdoin College. And he taught every subject except math, which...
Yeah, it's boring.
Just boggles my mind. So that's a polymath right there. I teach
math, so I can say that.
He left the college after 12 years and served in different positions. And in 1898, he volunteered for service in the Spanish-American War, but was rejected due to his bad health. Pretty old at that point.
Yeah, pretty old.
But that he died of wartime wounds in 1914 in Portland, Maine, at the age of 85.
It's interesting that he volunteered for service in the Spanish-American War. There were quite a few former Confederates that did. And in fact, one of the top U.S. generals in the Spanish-American War was a former Confederate cavalry general.
Huh.
We didn't mention him by name at all, I don't think, but his name was Joseph Wheeler. He was also called Fighting Joe, kind of like Fighting Joe Hooker, although unlike Hooker, he really was Fighting Joe. Fighting Joe Wheeler fought for the Confederacy and then later was made a major general in the U.S. Army during the Spanish-American War. The Spanish-American War was the last war where you had volunteer units. After that, the U.S. Army decided, we need to kind of standardize and normalize this Army and we don't want these volunteers coming in. If you're going to be in the Army, you're just in the regular Army. That's it. But yeah, Chamberlain his story is a great story. And once again, I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record, but listeners, you must read the book, The Killer Angels, and you must watch the movie Gettysburg. It is your homework after you finish this series to keep the love going, okay? Chamberlain's story is simply amazing, and he's in the movie Gettysburg. He's brilliantly played by Jeff Daniels, so you'll really enjoy that. All right, I'm going to wrap it up here since we had an unequal number of Confederates and Union people, and we could have done a lot more, but we didn't want to go on forever and ever. But we've got to talk about David G. Farragut of Damn the Torpedoes, Full Speed Ahead fame. Farragut was probably the greatest Union naval commander in the Civil War. After the war, like many of his colleagues, he was active in veterans associations, and he was promoted to full admiral in 1866, four-star admiral, becoming the first U.S. naval officer to ever hold that rank. His last active service was in command of the European Squadron from 1867 to 1868 with the screw frigate USS Franklin as his flagship. Farragut remained on active duty for his entire life, an honor accorded to only 7 other U.S. naval officers after the Civil War. Don't ask me to name those 7. I could make some guesses, but not a big expert on naval history. But he wasn't forced to retire. He got to stay on active duty, and he died in 1870 at the age of 69.
All right. Well, that's the Where Are They Now, or Where Were They Then series we want to wrap up on. But we are not completely done. There's one final thing we want to do in this series, and we want to talk about the lasting implications of the Civil War. What were the after effects of it? Obviously in politics, but what changed as a result of military tactics? What technology came out of the Civil War? And then also social change. How did America change as a result of the Civil War? And when you get down to it, what does the Civil War all mean? So we'll see you in that final episode. All right, well, that was the episode for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. First of all, I'd like to thank the Knowlton's Rangers, and especially our spy masters, Baron Fraser, Carl from Norway, Chris Romaine, Moondoggy from Ohio, and Rick Knowlton, and I'll explain what that means in a second. If you want to support the show and help me keep producing this content, there are 4 easy ways for you to do it. 1, subscribe to the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you want to do that, you can go to historyunpluggedpodcast.com, and there you'll find instructions. 2, join our Facebook group, which you can find if you just search for History Unplugged. And please like and share posts that I put up about new episodes. 3, submit a question to me so that I can answer it on air. You can email me at info@historyonthenet.com or leave a voicemail. And again, go to historyunpluggedpodcast.com and you'll find instructions. Lastly, and I think this one is the best, is to become one of the Knowlton's Rangers. The Knowlton's Rangers were an elite reconnaissance and espionage detachment of the Continental Army in the Revolutionary War, but it's also the name of the History Unplugged membership program. Learn how to join by going to patreon.com/unplugged. So here's what you get if you become one of the Knowlton's Rangers. If you join at the level of Scout, you can get early access to new podcast episodes, along with enjoying absolutely every single episode of the History Unplugged podcast ad-free. All 270 and counting episodes. If you join at the level of Intelligence Officer, you can also get access to premium episodes, like a multi-part series on the life of Audie Murphy, the most decorated combat soldier in World War II, or the 10-part series Ottoman Lives, a series that looks at the cast of characters that made up the Ottoman Empire, such as the Sultan, the Eunuch, the harem servant girl, and the soldier. And finally, if you join at the level of Spy Master, you get all the same stuff as the scouts and intelligence officers, but you also get a shout out to you and or your business at the end of each episode, a 3-pack of hardcover history books. Plus, you'll be put at the very front of the line for me to answer your question about history, and I can guarantee I will dedicate an episode that's about an hour long or so to your question. Sign up at patreon.com/unplugged. Again, that's patreon.com/unplugged. Anyway, those are the ways you can help out the show. Thank you so much for your support. Thanks for listening to the History Unplugged podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get your daily dose of all things history related, from ancient Greece to the Cold War. We'll see you next time at the History Unplugged podcast.